Massakkut saqqummiisussaq siulleq tassaavaq Julie Edel Hardenberg. Julie saqqummiinissamini qulaqutaqivaa nunasiaateqarnermik pissaanillit ataani inungorsimaneq nunasiaataasutut eqqarsarunnaarneq. Julie PhD-ngorniaavoq København Universitetimi aammalu Royal Danish Academy of Fine Artimi Associate Professoriuoq Bergen Academy of Art and Designimi. Julie massakkut aama saqqummersitsivoq nuuk kunstmuseumimi saqqummersitsineratu qulaqutaqarpoq nipangersitaassangitsut those who can't be silenced. Juliallu sungiffimmini sniskuuterernissani nuannarilluartuuaa. Julia takanna.
Tamas tikilluaratsi nuanna Inuit takullugi kiinnal aam ilisarnartut aam nuannaraarmeeqqannajuutteqarmut tassamiun taaksiunissaa ila aam tungavialuu eqqartuisut nipikippaqanillissavara anginermununa ila ja siullerm aaqqissuisun qujarusuppunga sammisam soqutiginaqasum peqataasinnaaga saniatiu aam quyafiirusuppak Inuit kiffaangissutti anersaavanik ааллаавеқарлути исуммерлутиллу исималиулерситсартут соорлутtaa оқалуттуарисаанитсинни Inuit киллиффитсиннут сунниутеқартарсимасут оқаартуутаат ипангерситассаангитсут оқаатигилаассаваа саққуммиуссунера уна Tuluttut ингерлассагакку кисанутсерисоқарпуут аватитсин сулеқатигут нунасиатаасиманеруп кингунераник илисиматусартут нунал иноққаанут писиннаатитааффилеерусуллутик сулиаллит пеқатаатиннеранни конференси уна аққутигалуу нунарсуарми оқаллиннеқ аннертусааффигатсигу соорлууна оқалугиаатера ақагуагу услуми ноогими оқалугиаатигиссагакку First, a little bit about myself. I'm a visual artist and a researcher. I'm born and raised here in Nuuk. For the past 30 years, I work with identity and post-colonial perspectives as an overall theme. For the moment, I'm working on my PhD research funded by Novo Nordisk Foundation, Mads Øvlesen PhD scholarship in practice-based artistic research at the University of Copenhagen and the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. Besides that, I have a part-time position as an associate professor at Bergen Academy of Art and Design. In my PhD project with the title Between Power and Powerlessness, The Decolonized Mind, I am examining the colonial memories and experiences that exist among the population in Greenland. My hypothesis is when you are born and raised in a society built on colonial structures and thought patterns, you may not always be aware of your own contribution to reproducing the colonial system. Therefore, the project aims to examine the more invisible aspect of the colonial structures and shed light on the impact they have on citizens and society. How do descendants of colonialism carry the colonial heritage with them? What processes do they undertake when they want to fit in or stand out? This year marks the 70th anniversary of Greenland's incorporation as a Danish county in 1953. As a citizen who was born and raised here in Nuuk, I reflect on this milestone, especially in Nuuk, where there's a big division among those who are affiliated to either Danish or Greenlandic mindsets. On the top of that, your affiliation to the different political profiles influence whether you succeed or not. As humans, we are archives of many experiences. And part of this presentation is reflecting on my own memories and experiences associated with colonial structures that have influenced my artistic process of decolonizing my mind and thought patterns. 500 years back, when the European states embarked on the exploration of other continents and the colonization of them, it marked the beginning of colonial experience in the shaping of human tragedies and stories. Yet my story does not begin with the colonization of Inuit Nunarput, whose Danish name can be traced back to the Icelandic name, Greenland, and their presence in the country during the period of year 1000 to 1500. A crucial transformation happened with the arrival of the Danish Norwegian missionary, Hans Egede, in 1721, searching for Roman Catholic Icelanders. However, they were nowhere to be found. But the meeting with the Inuit culture became crucial for his work as he established the colony Katuaq, now known as Nuuk. After World War II, with the establishment of the United Nations, the process of decolonizing European colonial possessions began. During this time, human rights and the rights of indigenous people became a prominent issue. While the United Nations had guidelines for what the colonial powers should present of political choices to the colonies, Denmark did not follow these guidelines, as they only presented 2 options out of 3 to the Greenlandic National Council. Greenland could become fully independent or be integrated into Danish state. The mandatory 3rd option, free association, was never presented as an option to the Greenlandic National Council. Few days after, without any formal discussions that include the population, Greenland was incorporated as an integral part of the Danish state. Danish labor went to the country and organized a new reality and structure, taking over leading positions in society and supporting the building of society according to the Danish model. The general self-perception of Danes as a good and supportive culture legitimized a new era of Danishation, which in reality meant a recolonization of Inuit in Nunarput. As the social anthropologist Julie Edel Hardenberg said at Rethinking Nordic Colonialism in 2006, I quote, "We have always been taught that we were one of the best colonies in the world. No slavery, no killings. We learned it through Danish history books and from Danish teachers. We went directly from being a colony into becoming a part of Denmark. We learned to be Danish and to be thankful." Since then, Inuit Nunarput has been struggling against the colonial power structures that exist in the society, where Danes and Danish companies still enjoy broad favoritism. However, Inuit Nunarput have managed to achieve Greenland home rule governance in 1979 and their own flag in 1986. In Greenland, in 2009, Greenland went a step further by gaining home rule governance. I was born into different paradigms with opposing interests and directions. One strengthened the relationship and assimilation to the Danish mindset. Another approach that strengthened the Inuit Nunarput language and culture. This takes us to my first day at school. I was 6 years old, and I remember standing in the hallway. There were different children, some with light features and others with dark features. Some who spoke Danish and others who spoke Nunarput. When the door opened, we were divided into Nunarput and Danish-speaking classes. It was the first time I experienced the concept of them and us. As kids, we quickly learned that there were huge differences between the Danish and Nunarput classes. I noticed the linguistic and social differences, that separated the two groups. The Danish-speaking classes were dominated by Danish culture, language and mindset, focusing on education in Denmark. Kids from the Kalaallit classes were also encouraged to take an education, but certainly not the longer and high educational programs. So the formal expectations of the two groups were very different. I remember the cultural and language barriers that challenged our learning by having new teachers from Denmark every year. We brought up with the storytelling about Greenland from a Danish perspective, in which we often didn't recognize ourselves in. On the other hand, we could recognize ourselves in the shared experience we had with Danes. And even though we knew that the Inuit culture existed in most places in the Arctic, it was not something we explored. We were primarily concerned with the Danish state of mind. Since the late 90s, the division of children in Kalaallit and Danish classes has been replaced by integrated classes where both languages are used. However, Danish culture and language are still given priority among the elite, as seen in the establishment of a Danish-speaking school in Nuuk called Nuuk Internationale Friskole. It's a general rule that Danish-speaking people are not expected to learn Kalaallit, while Inuit Kalaallit are expected to learn Danish and become bilingual. Ironically, my observations from Nuuk illustrate that children of mixed marriages who actually have the best grounds for learning both languages primarily become Danish speakers. It is no longer rare that a Greenlandic couple speaks Danish with their children. Young Inuit Kalaallit who wants to be a part of the globalized world are already aware of the fact that in addition to the Greenlandic language Kalaallit, they need to learn Danish or acquire at least one of the dominant languages of the world for educational purposes. But it doesn't seem as important to learn the local language Kalaallit as a way of adapting to the culture. The standard of Kalaallit, Danish bilingualism, is expected of the Kalaallit-speaking population, but not of the Danish-speaking. All this especially reflected in the educational sector, where the language of instruction is primarily Danish. This means that the Danish-speaking students still have better chances of acquiring an education because their chances of graduating are better. With roots in Inuit and Nordic cultures, also being bilingual in Kalaallit and Danish, I've realized the importance of language. Language gives us access to knowledge and convey knowledge. Language connects us to communities and where we are in the world. When we speak a language, we think in language. When we think and speak a language, we also connect to the culture. In language, both philosophy and history is to be found. When we think language, we often think ethnicity, but ethnicity doesn't always represent a linguistic affiliation. Ethnicity and physical appearance doesn't always represent a cultural understanding. That is why we make connections through language more than through ethnicity. While studying abroad, I realized that I had no distinct national identity, as I was a Danish citizen. My cultural identity, on the other hand, was my feeling of being an Inuit Kalaallit. When it came to flags, I noticed that the Greenlandic flag was the only Nordic flag without a Christian cross. At that point, I had no knowledge of post-colonial issues and indigenous rights among Sami people. However, my awareness was strengthened through my participation at Inuit Youth International Seminar in Katuaq, Canada, organized by ICC, and through Rethinking Nordic Colonialism, organized by Kuratorisk Aktion in 2006. After the years of study in Finland, Norway, England, and Denmark, I returned home to Nuuk and established a family. As well-educated Inuit Kalaallit, me and my husband entered a Danish-minded and privileged environment. All our friends were mostly from mixed marriages, typically with a Greenlandic mother and a Danish father. We were privileged in the sense that we had everything that a modern life required. But something was wrong. I didn't understand why I was still dissatisfied, and sensed that something was unredeemed. What was the point when few had succeed with a certain profile, and the majority felt alienated and struggled to fit in the society, where the existing role models in society were very far from the reality of their Inuit Kalaallit fellows? Especially reflecting on Inuit Kalaallit has the highest numbers of suicides, especially among young men. No one seems to reflect on their position and challenges in the society, where their ethnicity, culture, and language influence their opportunities. No child is born with a predisposition to suicide, but in our society, most people don't connect it to colonialism and racial structures. When you accept the doctrine that the most humane colonizer among the inhumane has colonized you, you might take the blame upon yourself. In a society where we don't allow room for anger and criticism towards those who participate in an oppressive structure, that anger is likely turned towards yourself, leading to a self-destructive process. Years passed, and while I became more critical towards our own society and system, I soon realized that the colonial power structures were very much still intact. In the political system, employer organization, educational system, cultural institutions, newspaper and television companies, and NGOs, and so on. No one wanted to accept such a discourse, and soon we realized that many others had the same experience. What struck us the most was the internalized racism reproduced among our own fellow citizens as a way of maintaining their position. Themes like assimilation, de/colonized minds suddenly came to mind. This was prompted by our daughter's belief that the Danish language spoken by her and other children in the kindergarten was the Kalaallisut language, whereas my spoken language, Kalaallisut, was foreign to her. My husband and I then decided to change our mindset. In 2008, the year before the introduction of the self-rule governance of Greenland, I launched a project with the main question: what will happen if I reclaim using only my mother tongue, Kalaallisut? I decided to speak exclusively Kalaallisut for 6 months, and thereby examining the linguistic, socio-cultural, and cognitive effects on using my first language in my home city, Nuuk. Despite these simple principles for a project that could seem unproblematic, I ended up being confronted with many different reactions about language and culture, which gave me a clear insight into the tensions that can exist between language and culture. Through the process, I realized that there were a huge lack of cultural and linguistic connection between the different groups in the society. I have come to understand our colonial history and its effect on society, and gain a more nuanced view of the different, evidently existing issues in the society. I have also obtained a deeper understanding and sympathy for people who feel alienated in their own homeland. Some of the reactions I received while working on my language projects are as follows. My husband and I were invited to a reception to celebrate the CEO of one of the bigger government-owned company. When we arrived, we were welcomed by the Danish CEO in his mother tongue. I smiled at him, and when I replied in Katuaq, the situation became very awkward, as he didn't understand what I was saying. While I was trying to explain him about my language project, his wife appeared with an awkward smile and asked, "Hvad finder du nu på, din skøre kvinde? What are you up to, you crazy woman?" Once again, I explained my project in Katuaq while I sensed a distance from my own fellows who became embarrassed since I created the awkward situation. People avoided me for the rest of the evening, also the only Katuaq-speaking Greenlandic man who sat at the table with me. One of my friends told me about something she had experienced at the post office in Nuuk. An older Inuit Katuaq woman had in embarrassment asked other customers to translate for her because the employee had told her that he did not speak Katuaq. I wondered whether it was reasonable that she should learn Danish in order to get customer service, or whether the employee should learn Katuaq in order to assist the customers. I once had a sponsored ticket from Air Greenland. When I decided to use it, I contacted the airline company by email. However, they politely asked me to resend my request in Danish. Then I replied in Katuaq with the result that it took 5 days before I heard from them again. My inquiry had to be translated. Air Greenland is a Greenlandic company that operates within Greenland and services its inhabitants. I know that the reverse situation would never occur. They would never ask a Danish-speaking person to resend the request in Katuaq. My husband once decided to improve his Katuaq language, and he plunged into it. He participated in the cultural program on TV, where he, in his poor and limited vocabulary, talked about his experiences. Many praised him, but there were others who cringed at the fact that he did it in front of the camera in his very incomplete Greenlandic. The project got a lot of attention. The output of the project was the Inuit Greenlandic government adopted on May 19, 2010, a law on language policy for companies and public institutions in Greenland. Of this, paragraph 4 states, private companies with at least 10 employees, public enterprises, and authorities should develop a language policy. But it doesn't say anything about the Inuit Katuaq language. As a part of the election concerning Greenland's South-Forward governance in 2009, I made the project Nunarput, where I encouraged the population to write me a letter about their expectation to self-rule governance. The letters and drawings that I received were later on display at Katuaq, along a catalogue that was distributed among politicians. I also made an installation on Block P, the Greenlandic flag, made out of clothing. The smaller prototype on right is to be seen at Nuuk Art Museum until October. I did the project in collaboration with the youth from Bjørsavik. It was a great time. Beside that, I invited designers and artists to create a dress symbolizing the new realm. This dress was my contribution. Some years later, I did a project in collaboration with the photographer from Deluxe Studio, Lars Kleeman Andersen. It is portraits of different Inuit Katuaq citizens staged as movie stars in movie posters. There is no movies behind those posters. The poster shows the potential for story making in our society. It is a way of using our own voices to tell our stories that we carry in our society. And notice All the titles is in Kalaallisut. They were on display at the Cultural House of Greenland, and those who were passing by thought there was a movie festival going on. They are also on display at Nuuk Kunstmuseum until October. In 2017, I took part in the exhibition Unraveling that looks at Denmark as a colonial power. In my contribution called Disconnection, an installation presented a mapping regarding language within management and boards among self-owned companies, NGOs and media, which showed that Inuit Kalaallit speakers were a clear minority. Especially the Inuk male were a minority in the leading positions. Women were also a minority, but those who were in charge were often Danish women or Greenlandic women married to Danes. During the project, I became aware of an incident where an appointment committee rejected an applicant's profile for being too Inuk-minded and therefore not a good fit for the job. In Greenland, equality only pertains to gender and not to language or cultural affiliation. So this is a poem about it. White fragility, it's called. They talk about equality. All I see is white supremacy. They talk about equality. All I hear is white feminism. They talk about equality. All I see is a tokenized Inuk. They talk about equality. All I hear is white fragility. In 2018, the Danish Art Foundation gave me the opportunity to submit a proposal for the decoration of the prayer room, social meeting room, at the correctional facility Anstalten. In order to represent the history and origins of the Inuit culture, whose beliefs were based on shamanism and animistic principles, I came up with an idea that embraced the inmate's attachment to their culture and history and integrated that in the snow crystal as a symbol. I also placed a Christian cross in the middle for those who seek it. Concerning the inventory, I hired Anna C. from Assange Furniture to make the liturgical furniture after a design I made. Concerning the baptismal font, I had sources, black sand from Katuaq, and hired Lena to experiment with it. Since the church space can be converted to other purposes, the furniture is designed so that its function can be adapted to other purposes. And even though the qilat is not a part of the liturgical inventory, I decided to place one near the entrance to connect the space to our own history. We humans are archives of experience and knowledge, and if there's anything we as a previous colony have experience with, it's several centuries of colonialism, internalized racism, and strategies of assimilation. What does it mean for our society and the relation between Inuit Kalaallit and Danes when the narrative of Greenland being colonized by the most humane among the inhumane becomes the dominant narrative? When the state of Denmark have a national identity approach to our reality rather than a humanistic approach? Who has the right to define who we are? Where we, Inuit Kalaallit, will be in 100 years, when it, as one of the smallest languages and cultures, hasn't secured its legal rights as Inuit Kalaallit, and instead leave the discourse to forces driven by financial and geopolitical interests. Luckily, the movement of Black Lives Matter has created new platforms and discourses focusing on colonial heritage, also here in Greenland. In that sense, we need a safe space to discuss those issues. I myself have experienced art as a perfect space to articulate challenges and reflections within colonial structures. Today, I am teaching my children that our history does not begin with the colonization of Inuit Galatlit, Nunarput, 300 years ago. Instead, the history of our people goes way back, where our ancestors had great skills and deep knowledge on how to survive in the Arctic, exactly like we know where we belong and how to develop and continue living in our homeland. I seek to inspire them to be critical towards a structure that practices structural racism and cultural discrimination, where the struggle of gender and equality doesn't always include language and cultural representation. I also let my children understand the complexity of the world history, and that diversity means inclusion of endangered languages and cultures in the world. The honor goes to those who had enough integrity to carry society forward without losing themselves. You are welcome to come by at Nuuk Art Museum, where I'm exhibiting some of those pieces that I have shown in this presentation. Thank you for listening.
Juliamut qanaruissua. Juliamut apequssisaqarteqassagaluarpat kingusinnarusukkut ornilaarlu aperisinnaarvarsi taavalu aama maani oqallittoqarnerani kingusinnarusukkut periarfissaqarumaarpusi apeqqutiqarsinnaanissassin.